My name is Chris, and I am, of course, the gaming librarian. Here tonight to talk to you as part of our intro to gaming in libraries about video game, TVs, accessories, and everything in between. So, as you can guess, I'll be talking about ideal televisions, monitors, various controllers, and VR headsets that you can explore, and sort of the mishmash in between of accessories that you can get for your video gaming consoles if you're looking at building a new collection for your library. Now, in 2021, purchasing a gaming TV is a little bit different than, say, it was about 5 years ago. And so there's a number of things to consider when going forward and purchasing a TV. The first thing that you want to look for are HDMI ports. So gone are the days of composite cables, the traditional yellow, red, and white inputs, and instead has been replaced by HDMI. Now, most TVs have anywhere between 2 to 4 ports, and so ideally, if you're only having 1 or 2 consoles in your library, then by all means, a television with 2 ports works perfectly well, no issues there. However, if you are looking at using that television for anything more, so for example, I've made recommendations to my own library that when we are upgrading our TV, we may want to look at it not only being a television that's used for gaming, but also a multimedia center where teens and patrons can come along and easily plug in their devices into, for example, a laptop, using an HDMI, then maybe having more than 2 ports is ideal. As well, the quality of the HDMI ports is something to take into mind. So within the last year or two, there has sort of been an upgrade to the HDMI format. Most HDMI ports that are in TVs made within the last decade are HDMI 2.0. So they're your basic HDMI. They allow for up to 60 hertz to transfer through, and I'll talk about hertz in a little bit. And typically allow for 4K content to stream through without issue. Now, 2.1 is something that you want to consider, though, especially if you're looking at picking up, say, an Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5, where these consoles are capable of pushing out a little more power and graphical fidelity to them, and naturally are going to need things like 120 hertz output and a cable that facilitates that. Now, thankfully, the cables that come packed in with these systems are ultra high speed HDMI cables themselves, but if you don't have an HDMI 2.1 port, then you're not going to reap the benefits of the full potential of these new generation consoles. In terms of screen, considerative of is whether you want to go LED, QLED, or OLED. So LED is standing for light emitting diodes. Obviously, that's a tongue twister on that one. The Q in QLED standing for quantum dots, and then the O in OLED standing for organic. Each one of these carry their own benefits. So LED is the most common one that we see nowadays. It's in our monitors. It's in most televisions that are non-4K. Nowadays, whereas QLED and OLED are the step forwards that you start entering into. And my apologies, LED tends to go up to 1080p in resolution. QLED and OLED are the 4K ones. And in rare cases, if you're willing to spend a lot of money, 8K, but again, 8K technology is just coming out nowadays, and so it's probably going to be a couple of years before it really hits an affordable price point. Now, as I was alluding to before with the HDMI ports, if you are getting these newer consoles, the TVs that are really going to make them shine and make the games look as beautiful as they possibly can are the QLED and OLED televisions. To the side, the TV up top is the LG C1 OLED, and down below is the Samsung Q80 QLED TV. I myself at home have the Samsung Q series, so I have a Q60 in my gaming room behind this screen, and then in our living room we have a Q80. With these screens, I find that they are absolutely fantastic in displaying bright, vibrant, vivid colors. However, their blacks display not as well as OLED. And what I mean by the blacks in the coloring and in the ratio is that say you enter into a pitch black room and there's only a few objects around you. The black level on your screen is going, if it's, an OLED screen, you're going to be able to see those objects more clearly. It's not going to all blur together into one. Whereas I find on the QLED screen, because of their black levels being a little bit darker in my vision and viewpoint, it makes it harder to see objects in really dark lit rooms. And that's not only for games, that's for things like movies. Whereas OLED tends to pop not only in color, but also with sort of the black levels that they have in there. There is inherent risks though. So OLED is an upgraded version in some ways of plasma. And if you've ever had the joys of having a plasma television, the risk of having burn into your screen is something that's there. Now, unlike the plasma televisions of 10, 15 years ago, where if you left your game or a movie in its menu screen for more than 15 or 20 minutes, you more than likely ran a chance of burning that image into your screen forever. OLED is much more forgiving. It would literally have to sit there for hours upon hours on end, just sitting dormant. And with most of these gaming consoles nowadays, there's automatic power shutoffs, so that after an hour, actually even after 10 minutes, the system itself is dimming the screen, and then within an hour just shutting off the console entirely. But a consideration to make when you're looking at OLED versus QLED, especially in the library setting where sometimes the television can be left unattended for some amount of time. Just being mindful that either if you have a QLED screen, you're not worrying about that, or if you have an OLED screen, that you're going out of your way to dive into the settings on your consoles to make sure that in the power saving settings, you've set it so that it shuts off automatically after a set amount of time. Now, the quality of the image is something to consider. So 1080p is sort of like the basic threshold of high definition nowadays. In some cases, for example, this stream pushes out at 780p, which is an acceptable standard. 480p was sort of like the best looking YouTube videos of, say, the early 2010s. And then you dip as low as, 244 or down into the 140s. And that, for those who are old enough to remember, is that 2005 dawn of YouTube, very blurry, hazy video resolution. 1080p is sort of the standard that you push out, and when you're in YouTube and you set it to the highest possible resolution output, that tends to be what it sets to. 1440p is sort of an in-between between 1080p and 4K. And so what I mean by this is 1440p is a standard that's most commonly found on computer monitors. So it's a little bit sharper than 1080p, but it doesn't have the vivid sharpness that you'll see in a 4K image. That being said, it usually tends to be cheaper to find things that display at 1440p versus 4K, and you can also get more consistent frame rates. So, for example, the Xbox Series S, which is the all-digital console, only outputs 1440p at max. Now, this is still enough to make games look absolutely gorgeous, but you'll notice if you hook it up to a 4K TV, it's not going to look as beautiful as it possibly could. Whereas the Series X for the Xbox and then both the PlayStation 5 consoles are capable of putting out 4K. 4K does exist in computer monitors, but it's a very common resolution format in televisions nowadays, so it's the big selling point when you go out to buy a fancy new television. It'll say 4K on it, and that's the thing that's meant to catch your attention. 4K imagery is absolutely great. Really makes imagery pop, not only in games but in movies and television. However, you do want to take advantage of that resolution in different ways. So making sure that your console's set up to output at 4K, making sure that your HDMI port can handle that you're using the cable that came with your console instead of an aftermarket one that may not be able to put out the same degree of resolution. And in some cases, as we'll talk about in the next one, 4K is just a standard, but particularly with these new generation of consoles, what you'll find is that the 4K is hampered in some degree by the hertz, or in this case, frames per second that your console and screen can interact with. And so I'll lead into that. So quality of frames per second, 60 versus 120 frames per second, or in this case, hertz. This has been a great debate going forward because most games commonly nowadays output anywhere between 30 to 60. That's the common standard going forward, and it's a very easy benchmark to achieve. In rare cases, though it's becoming less and less rare nowadays with this next generation of consoles having come out, where 120 is now the benchmark. The best way I can describe 60 versus 120 frames is think of the smoothest looking animation and motion that you've seen on a television screen or have seen in a fighting game or in a movie theater. For the most part, that is 60 frames per second or 60 hertz being output. 120 frames is noticeable in this sense because it just, for lack of a better word, pops. It's sharper, it's more vivid, and in the time that it takes to, for example, if you're playing a first-person shooter where this really stands out, to move your character and adjust and look at the world, it just moves buttery smooth and with no skip, no hesitation. And what you're starting to see are these consoles outputting 4K at 120 frames per second, especially in popular franchises like Call of Duty, so the first-person shooter genre, but also racing games. Games like Forza Motorsport, the upcoming Gran Turismo, all promise to put out this 120 hertz at 4K, which just means absolutely smooth animations, less screen tear. And so when you're looking at the build of your TV, you want to keep in mind the hertz. Most QLED, OLED TVs with a 2.0 HDMI port are going to push out 60. And that's great. To the average eye, you're not really going to notice it. That being said, if you are able to spend the extra bit of money and you want to future-proof not only the consoles but also the television that you're purchasing, and to really showcase the new tech that you have in your library, I would recommend trying to at least find televisions that have 4K and 120 hertz to them. Often, the case that I have found is that televisions that offer the 4K 120 hertz tend to be no smaller than about 48 inches. So really something that you want to consider is the space that it's going to be sitting in. If it's a very small confined space, maybe 48 inches is the absolute max that you can go. Whereas if it's a more open space and you know that the television is going to be against the back wall and your patron's sort of sitting further away from the television screen itself, then certainly look, 55, 65. 65 is actually a really golden number in terms of television inches because it's the perfect size of a screen without being overwhelming, and you don't have to sit too far away. With a 65-inch screen at home for myself in our living room, we probably have about a 10-foot distance between our couch and the television screen, and it's the perfect viewing angle. It's enough for your eyes to take in most of the image, and you're not only having to focus on one part of the screen and then shift your focus entirely to a different part. Now, that 4K and 120 hertz, if you see 120 hertz being advertised on the television itself, that typically means that it does have at least one 2.1 HDMI port, if not multiple. But again, you're going to be paying that little bit more to have that luxury on the television screen. So right now, for example, the LG C1 televisions are anywhere in the range of 1,800 Canadian, so American maybe about 1,400, all the way up into the 2,000 or 3,000 mark, depending on size that you're getting. That being said, picking up the LG C1 OLED with the ability to push out to 4K at 120, every port in that television is HDMI 2.1. You're future-proofing. It's an investment that you're going to have for as long as that TV will last, unless some freak accident occurs with it. Whereas the QLED and the Samsungs tend to be a little bit cheaper. The ports you have to be careful of with the Samsungs now, though I do believe the 2021 models have almost fully shifted over to the 2.1 format, are cheaper for the reason that they're not necessarily pushing out 120 hertz necessarily. As well, some televisions are considerate of the fact that you may be connecting a PC to it, in which case, depending on the graphics card that you have in your gaming PC, if it's an AMD, then it benefits from FreeSync. If it's an NVIDIA graphics card, then it connects and boosts its performance with G-Sync, are things to consider. Also, check to see if your television has a game mode. Samsung, I know for sure does, as well as LG, and it's a setting that you can go into with your television, set it to game mode, and then this way it auto presets color ratios and contrast and brightness ratios that benefit a gaming environment the most. So instead of having to pour through various tech websites, the TV determines that for you. Also, you want to see if it has high dynamic resolution. Most 4K TVs will have HDR automatically, but it's things to keep in mind, as well as VRR. So variable refresh rate, which means it's consistently shifting between the resolution and the refresh rate that is being output by the gaming console and the TV, meaning that, you know, when you're playing a first-person shooter, you're getting the best performance possible, no screen tearing, and sort of flashy split-second visuals happening right away. That being said, an alternative as well, if you're not wanting to get a television, or maybe you're looking at setting up smaller stations with various gaming consoles, are PC monitors. So most PC monitors come with 3 display ports nowadays. So they have your traditional VGA, so that's your classic blue cable with all the prongs up top that you plug in. It also comes with the DisplayPort format and the HDMI format. So obviously the HDMI being the benefit here, because you can connect the gaming console to a computer monitor with ease. I often find with these particular ones, for example, the computer monitor that I have right in front of me, for example, is really beneficial because obviously I didn't want to spend out thousands of dollars to get a 4K 120 hertz TV because I had just purchased one, but wanted to reap the benefits of my next gen consoles. So instead, I got a computer monitor for a fraction of the cost of what a TV would be. It's 27 inches, but it's able to output 144 hertz, so well above what I needed from the console. But the catch is that the resolution is set at 1440p. As I said, it's not a bad resolution. It's high definition. It's that middle ground, so it's not as sharp as 4K, but it's certainly sharper and more vibrant than 1080p. And again, most consoles and games will sort of, capstone at a certain point. And so 1080p being the standard, 1440p is just a luxury, and 4K above that. Similar to televisions, with computer screens, you do want to keep a number of things in mind. So the resolution, the number of ports on it, but most importantly, screen size. As you are so much closer to the screen, I would definitely recommend no bigger than 32 inches, especially if you're going to be sitting in a traditional role in a gaming chair on a desk where there's a keyboard and a mouse in front of you. My apologies, simply because anything bigger than 32 inches, and this could just be personal preference, tends to be more overwhelming than it is anything else. Also, as I alluded to before, different monitors will favor different graphics cards. So if you know what kind of graphics card you have in your PC, then I would definitely recommend getting the computer monitor that interacts and benefits most from that graphics card. So for example, my monitor is an Acer 27-inch 1440p monitor. It's meant for gaming specifically, but it also has NVIDIA G-Sync technology built in, so it automatically detects that I have a NVIDIA graphics card in my PC, and when I'm playing games, sort of boosts the performance in the best way possible. Whereas AMD and its FreeSync technology tends to benefit overall most gaming consoles as well as PCs. So if you're looking at using a computer monitor only for a gaming console and not necessarily a gaming PC, then FreeSync monitors are plentiful. G-Sync tend to be a little bit harder to find, and will work perfectly well with your gaming consoles with no issue. Now, moving on to the wonderful world of controllers. So, of course, every console will have its own set of controllers, and as time goes along, those controllers will change from generation to generation. And so I'll highlight the three big consoles that are out there, so Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo. And I'll highlight sort of some of the things to consider when you're looking at building up your controller collection, because all of these consoles do offer varied multiplayer, and well, some of them are nice enough and have software that allow you to connect through your phone. Most will require controllers of some kind. Now, with the Xbox, and just in general, when purchasing any controller, I do recommend trying to purchase the brand-specific ones. So in this case, Xbox-specific controllers are made by Microsoft and says so on the box. The Sony DualSense is only done by Sony. The third-party controllers tend to be cheaper. They also come at the cost of quality and build. And when you're purchasing directly from the brand itself, not only are you guaranteeing yourself a better build quality and controllers that'll likely last you right through the console cycle and then some, and the console generation, you also have some guarantee of a warranty. So if something happens to the controller within a couple of months, most companies are kind enough to warrant that and give you the benefit of the doubt and replace the controller. Now, Xbox is very easy to purchase controllers for. I say this because, as you can see in the image to my left, the controllers are almost identical. The only difference between them being the D-pad. So as you can see, the top controller is for the Xbox One, the bottom one is for the Xbox Series S and X, and the D-pad is slightly different. So the rounder, fuller D-pad on the Series S and X controller allows for more pivoting points. Really great for fighting games, not necessarily for and platformers, but not for other genres of games. And you'll also notice in the center parts a dedicated share button so that you can automatically share content, take screenshots, that kind of thing on your Xbox. However, Microsoft was very kind in future fitting their next generation or this current generation of consoles by ensuring that if you had a whole bunch of Xbox One controllers already, those controllers now work with your new Series S or X, no problem. The only thing that you're losing out on is a dedicated share button, so instead you have to press on the Xbox logo button up top and sift through a couple of screens, so it takes you an extra 10 or 15 seconds to capture a gaming moment. And the D-pad, but otherwise, if you've already invested hundreds of dollars into these controllers, they're there for you now. As well, cost-wise, these tend to be the cheapest controllers of the three big console manufacturers. So the average cost for these controllers ranges from about $70 to $80 Canadian, depending on the color or special edition of the controller, or $50 American. Whereas the PlayStation comes in two forms. So up top we have the DualSense 4, which was the main controller of the PlayStation 4. And then down below is the newest DualSense, which is the main controller of the PlayStation 5. Now, it doesn't look like there are many differences to them, but there are some subtle ones. So obviously, the biggest change is in the shape. In my personal opinion, the DualSense is probably one of the, actually second most comfortable controller I've ever held in my hands ever. But it also has a built-in microphone this time around, whereas the DualShock 4 had a speaker that you could sometimes hear game audio through. With the DualSense, you can also talk back to players. So if you don't have a dedicated microphone, in this case, you can at least talk to players through your controller. As well, the DualSense is truly one of the most next-gen controllers I've had the privilege of using, and as much as some of the gimmicky spiel that they may give about haptic feedback sound just like that, gimmicky, it really stands true to form. The way that you play with vibration in the controller, the way the triggers sort of respond and offer resistance and pressure against your finger pressing down on it in some games, it adds that little bit of nuance to a game that really draws the player in. That being said, the DualSense is the most expensive first-party controller on the market. So the average cost for the DualShock is between, $70 to $80 Canadian, or $50 to $60 American, whereas the DualSense starts in at $90 Canadian. If not a little bit more for some of the new colors that they have coming out next week. So the sort of cranberry, darker red, and black controllers, or $60 to $70 American. So you're definitely paying top dollar for the PlayStation controllers, but you're also getting one of the most comfortable ones in the market. Small caveat with these controllers, unlike the Xbox Ones, where if you have Xbox One controllers, they will work on this generation of consoles. So on the Xbox Series S and X, the DualShock 4s will not work on the PlayStation 5, and vice versa. The DualSense does not work on the PlayStation 4. Surprisingly, it does work if you connect it by a USB cable to a PS3, but not the PS4. And so it's likely that they will not add that functionality going forward. So know full well that if you've had a PlayStation 4 in the past in your library and you're upgrading to the PlayStation 5, you are going to have to buy an entirely new set of controllers all over again. The last console manufacturer, Nintendo, offers two varieties of controllers for their newest Nintendo Switch console. So on the very top and separated are the Joy-Cons. And so these ones connect directly to the console themselves and offer that portability factor, and what allows you to have sort of the on-the-go multiplayer where you can, go over to a friend's house, and if you don't have Pro controllers or they don't have a Switch themselves, you can each play with one Joy-Con a piece. Very fun, great concept. However, if you're looking for something a little more comfortable and long-lasting, I would definitely recommend, as shown below, the Pro controller. The benefit of the Pro controller is that it's just a better build quality. The D-pad is easier to use on it. The sticks are better, and the battery life is the best of any controller out there. On a full charge, the Nintendo Switch Pro controller will last you anywhere in the range of 60 to 80 hours before it needs to be charged again. And so that's going from 100% down to 0. Absolutely great controller design. Has all the features that the Joy-Cons have. It just obviously cannot attach in any feasible way physically to the console itself. So you want to make sure that you have a space to store it accordingly. But when you're building a library collection, I definitely recommend, if you have the finances to do so, investing in Pro controllers, especially with ongoing issues in terms of the Joy-Cons and potential stick drift. The Pro controllers seem to have avoided that. And so they're going to be controllers that last you the entire life cycle of the Nintendo Switch and then some. That being said, these are the most expensive of all three manufacturers. So for first-party Joy-Cons or even the Pro controller, you're looking at least $100 Canadian, or about 70 to 80 American, just by walking into the store and buying it. Every 6 months or so, you may be able to catch a sale where there's about $20 off of these controllers. But again, very costly. And when given a choice between spending $100 on the Joy-Cons or $100 on the Pro controller, if you can justify it, I would definitely go for the Pro controllers over the Joy-Cons. Now, moving away from controllers, but into sort of the new accessory field. And this is if you already have a PlayStation console, or if you have a dedicated console but you're wanting that really unique experience. Virtual reality is something that has become more and more popular and accessible within the past 5 years. It is an expensive accessory to purchase, and so as I allude down to below, depending on the VR headset that you want, you're looking at least a entry point of $400 for things like the PSVR, which I've noted up top, or the Oculus Rift. And then if you want the high-end virtual reality headsets, things like the Valve Index, which, don't get me wrong, games are absolutely gorgeous on this headset. It does require a PC to connect to with a high-end graphics card, And while the headset is absolutely gorgeous and outputs great image quality and performance, you're looking at least $1,000 to $1,200 before tax, entering into that high-end VR market. That being said, these headsets are absolutely wonderful, so long as you don't get motion sickness, which is something that I know I suffer from. It offers really unique gaming experiences to your patrons that you're serving. Things like the PSVR and the Oculus Quest have fantastic games, like the Vader Immortal, where you get to play as Darth Vader. In the Star Wars universe, they have games like Beat Saber, which is sort of like Rock Band, but with lightsabers, and you're slashing at blocks as they come along your way to the rhythm of the music. They also have really unique experiences where you're exploring the world and just venturing around. The one that comes to mind for me is Astro's Playroom, which is a good example of what PlayStation is able to put out with its VR headsets. Now, the two headsets that I've brought up here offer you an example of what you can expect with some headsets. The PSVR is still wired in, and so it does require a wire running to the console because the headset itself is just acting as a screen and slight performance booster, whereas the console is the one carrying the heavy weight of performance and actually processing the game at hand. Whereas the headset included or imaged below the Oculus Quest is its own standalone. So all this unit consists of is the headset itself and the controllers, with all the computing power built into the headset itself. But it comes at the cost of slightly lesser performance. Image quality resolution is not as sharp as you would see from others that are wired into computers or gaming consoles, but it gives you complete freedom and range of movement to move around. And I will give a heads up, so the PSVR headset itself is a couple of years old now, so it came out in 2017, and there have been discussions that within the next few years we can expect a revised version, so sort of think of it like the PSVR 2, that'll be compatible with the PlayStation 5 console. Again, it's looking like it's still going to be wired in to the PS5 itself, but you can expect sort of beefier, more performance-worthy experiences come out of it. So VR, definitely a gaming space worth exploring if you want to, but I would suggest starting with gaming consoles first, as these tend to be the more accessible gaming platforms that patrons will relate with. Whereas if you already have the consoles and want something that you can really highlight or have as a unique part of your library's gaming experience, then by all means enter into the VR gaming space. Now, in the comment section, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask them here, either live in the chat or when I upload this to YouTube. If you want to leave questions in the YouTube comments area, I will be happy to go in and reply and answer them as possible. And so next Wednesday, if you want to tune in for a new episode and another episode of Intro to Gaming in Libraries, what I will be doing is sort of highlighting again the big three main consoles, so the Nintendo Switch, the PlayStation 4 and 5, and the Xbox One and Series S and X consoles, and be looking at the top 10 games to add to your library. And so these will be titles that span a broad range of genres, of age ratings and audiences, but also really unique experiences. And again, don't hesitate at any time for something like this is of course my own perspective, but offer your own feedback. If there's games that you would like to see mentioned or brought up, I am happy to do so. And check out sites like Reddit or IGN that offer fantastic feedback on games that are coming out and are new and relevant. And if they are open for you where you are, your gaming shops, your EB Games, your GameStops, your mom and pop gaming stores, because they are the best people to talk to. I know I started as an EB Games employee many years ago, and sort of how I got my start in gaming knowledge. And so these are the experts in their fields to go and talk to. All right. I will end on the references and resources that I used for the images and information brought up today. So if you want to learn more, don't hesitate to go and explore these different sites. And thank you. This has been Chris, the gaming librarian, talking to you about gaming TVs, accessories, and everything in between. And feel free. And I hope to see you next Wednesday for the new episode of Intro to Gaming in Libraries. Have a great night, and this is Chris the Librarian signing off.